Someone screaming on the 42nd, move or she bullets!
A voice snapped through the stairwell radio. Smoke rolled under the door like a living thing, and a trapped executive couldn't breathe. People with badges and authority froze, barking instructions that only made it worse. The building's lowest-ranked worker moved in calmly, sealed a door, and guided her through heat like he'd done it before. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. By morning, he walked into a job interview, only to see the same woman behind the hiring desk. And that's when the real fire started. The one money can't put out. This wasn't just about a rescue. It was about dignity being tested, then proven in front of witnesses. Before anyone sees the exact moment when the interview room alarms lock and a service map on his phone becomes everyone's lifeline, you have to understand how the night began, where power never looks. Evan Calder didn't run toward danger for applause. He ran because choking meant seconds, and seconds were math. He kept his voice even, steady enough to make chaos listen. The men in tailored coats hesitated at the landing. He stepped past them like the uniform on his back gave him the right. His jaw set hard. He was a single father before he was anything else, and the day started with a small body wheezing behind a bedroom door. Lily's asthma made mornings a careful ritual. Warm water, measured breaths. The inhaler spacer cleaned like it was sacred. Rent sat on the counter under a magnet, and the pharmacy receipt curled at the edges. Every choice he made had her name inside it, even the ones that looked like pride. Night shift paid more, and night shift asked fewer questions. The high-rise was two worlds stacked together, marble lobbies above, service corridors below. Upstairs, people said amenities. Downstairs, people said pressure valves. He moved through the labor zones with a ring of keys that never stopped clinking, a sound that told him where he belonged. A security guard nodded without really seeing him, like the building had learned to ignore the hands that kept it alive. He checked fire doors twice on his rounds. He listened for odd airflow. He watched for heat where heat shouldn't be. If anyone had looked closely, they would have noticed the way he touched a vent grate like he was reading a pulse. In the maintenance room, fans rattled like tired bones. He logged tasks on a slow tablet, then wrote the important bits on a folded paper map in his pocket. Digital systems failed. Paper didn't. A photo of Lily was taped inside his locker door, her grin bright enough to fight the fluorescent glare. At 1:17 a.m., the first alarm chirped. Not the full siren, just a warning tone that made most people roll their eyes. His stomach tightened. He'd heard that sound in other places, other years, when it meant more than inconvenience. He started moving before the central panel finished thinking, boots thudding on concrete as he cut toward the service stairwell. The radio crackled with security, concierge, and a resident insisting it was probably just smoke from cooking. Then the building told the truth. A hot, bitter scent punched through the corridor, sharp enough to sting his eyes. Heat radiated through the wall near the trash chute, an unnatural warmth that didn't belong. He pressed his palm to the surface and felt the pulse of it, fast, angry, spreading. The dampers should have sealed, the pressure should have held. Something was broken in the chain. He yanked open a utility closet and grabbed what the building never bothered to provide properly. A good flashlight, door wedges, a compact respirator he'd bought himself. He didn't think about how that looked. He thought about lungs. Somewhere above, a woman coughed, ragged, panicked. Then the sound cut off like a cord pulled tight. "Maintenance, stand down," someone ordered on the radio. "Fire response is en route." He didn't answer. He was already climbing. The stairwell door was warm under his glove, and the air beyond it tasted like burned plastic. As he pushed upward, the alarm finally bloomed into a full siren, a howl that turned the whole tower into a warning. On the next landing, 2 men in business shirts stood frozen, one clutching his phone like it could buy an exit. "Which floor?" he demanded, voice slicing through their shock. One of them swallowed. 42, she went back. The detail didn't matter, the seconds did. He set a wedge at the stairwell door, tested the swing, and pictured bodies moving the way water should. Then he climbed again, eyes on the smoke line creeping down from above, ready to meet whoever was trapped before the building decided for them. The stairwell narrowed as he climbed, concrete walls sweating heat that shouldn't have been there yet. Each step took him closer to the coughing he'd heard, ragged, desperate, the sound of air scraping past fear. The siren wailed louder here, vibrating through his boots and into his bones. He counted floors by instinct, not numbers, feeling the pressure change in his ears the way he used to long before this building ever existed. On 41, the smoke thickened enough to blur the exit sign into a red smear. He slowed just enough to pull the respirator over his mouth, cinching it tight. The radio crackled again, someone shouting about elevators locked, someone else demanding confirmation that the VIP resident was accounted for. He shut it off. Noise killed focus. The door to 42 resisted when he pushed. He leaned his shoulder into it, muscles burning, until it gave with a groan. Heat rolled out in a wave, stealing moisture from his eyes. The corridor beyond was a tunnel of haze, fire alarms screaming overhead, sprinkler heads spitting useless mist that hissed when it hit something already too hot. "Hey," he called, keeping his voice low, steady. "If you can hear me, answer." A cough replied from the far end, followed by a choked attempt at speech. He moved toward it, flashlight beam cutting a narrow path through the smoke. Designer art blurred on the walls, frames cracking as heat warped them. This was a place built to look untouchable. Fire didn't care. She was slumped near a stairwell door that refused to open, one hand clawing at the handle, the other pressed to her chest. Her hair was immaculate even now, but her eyes were wild, glassy with panic. Expensive suit, expensive watch, lungs that didn't know how to beg for air. "Don't try to stand," he said, dropping beside her. "Look at me. Breathe when I say." She shook her head, tried anyway, nearly toppled. He caught her shoulder, firm but gentle, grounding her. He checked the door. Pressure jammed it tight. Of course, the system had failed in the worst order possible. "I can't," she gasped. "You can," he corrected, already working. He wedged the door, sealed the gap low with a towel from a nearby apartment, and adjusted the vent above them with a practiced twist. The airflow shifted, subtle but real, pulling smoke away instead of feeding it back. He counted her breaths with his fingers, slowed them, synced them to his own. Minutes stretched thin as wire. The fire roared somewhere unseen, but here, in this pocket, the air steadied enough to survive. He guided her up when she could stand, one step at a time, a body between her and the heat. When the stairwell finally gave, cool air rushed in like mercy. Down below, responders took over, voices sharp and efficient. Someone wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. She looked back once, eyes searching through the chaos, and then she was gone, carried into a sea of uniforms and flashing lights. He stayed long enough to give a report no one really listened to, then slipped back into the service corridors before anyone thought to ask his name. Morning came fast. Too fast. He woke Lily gently, helped her sit up, counted breaths with her the same way he'd counted the woman's. The inhaler hissed, medicine doing its quiet work. Her fingers curled into his sleeve until the wheeze softened. "You okay, Dad?" she asked, voice still rough with sleep. "Yeah," he said. "I am." The interview suit hung in the closet, pressed thin with care. He hadn't worn it in years, but it still fit, like another life waiting patiently. He packed his service map back into his pocket out of habit, then stopped, almost laughed, and left it there. The corporate tower glittered in daylight, all glass and confidence. Inside, the lobby hummed with low voices and polished shoes. He checked in, sat where he was told, and felt the familiar slide of invisibility settle over him as people walked past without seeing. A receptionist glanced at his hands, still bearing faint marks from heat and work. "Facilities is down the hall," she said automatically. "I'm here for an interview," he replied, calm as ever. She blinked, flushed, pointed him toward the elevators without apology. As the doors closed, he exhaled slowly, grounding himself the way he always did before something important. "By the way, if you're still with me, subscribe so you don't miss what happens when this building tests him again." The elevator chimed at the executive floor. He stepped out into a space that smelled like coffee and ambition, unaware that the woman whose life he'd steadied hours ago was about to decide whether his future would breathe or choke. The executive floor felt colder than the lobby, the air conditioned to a level that assumed comfort meant control. He stepped fully out of the elevator and let the doors close behind him, the soft thud sounding final like a seal. Ahead, glass walls framed conference rooms where people sat with laptops open, posture straight, faces practiced. Everything here was designed to look unburned, untouched by smoke or fear. A small sign directed applicants to a waiting area. He followed it, boots quieter on the carpet than they'd been on concrete hours earlier. The room held 3 other candidates, all dressed in variations of confidence, tailored jackets, polished shoes, portfolios placed just so. Conversation hummed low, comparisons disguised as small talk. He took the last chair, hands resting loosely on his knees, breathing even. No one asked him what he did. No one offered a smile. Their eyes skimmed him and slid away, landing on reflections in the glass or the screens in their hands. He'd learned not to take that personally. Invisibility was a tool if you knew how to use it. A woman in a fitted blazer stepped in, tablet tucked under her arm. "We'll be starting shortly," she said, eyes already moving past him. "Please have your materials ready." He nodded anyway. His resume sat neatly folded in a slim folder, paper edges worn from being handled too many times. It listed maintenance experience, safety certifications, systems oversight. It did not list the other life. That one lived elsewhere. Through the glass he saw movement in the main conference room. Chairs being arranged, water poured. A familiar laugh drifted out, light but authoritative. His stomach tightened before his mind caught up. Then she appeared. The woman from the stairwell stood at the head of the table, hair perfectly set, suit replaced with another just as sharp. No blanket now, no smoke-stung eyes. She looked composed, powerful, unmistakably in charge. Her voice carried easily as she spoke to the panel, hands moving with practiced emphasis. For a split second, he wondered if she'd recognize him. The angle was different. The lighting. He'd been masked, smeared with soot. She'd been terrified. People didn't always remember faces from their worst moments. The assistant called the first name. One of the candidates rose, offered a tight smile to the room, and disappeared behind the glass. The door closed softly. He sat very still. Minutes passed. Muffled voices rose and fell. Laughter once. A pause that stretched too long. Then the door opened, and the candidate returned, looking smaller, portfolio clutched tighter than before. The second name. Same ritual. By the time the assistant said his, the room felt heavier, like pressure building ahead of a storm. He stood, smoothed the front of his jacket, and walked toward the glass. Each step felt deliberate, grounded. He didn't rush. He didn't hesitate. Inside, the panel looked up in near unison. 4 people. 3 men and her. She was seated at the center, tablet in front of her, expression neutral. Her eyes flicked to his resume, then to his face. Recognition didn't come immediately. Instead, there was assessment, measurement. The quick, unconscious sorting people did when they believed they could. "Please," she said, gesturing to the chair opposite. "Have a seat." He sat. The chair was comfortable in a way that suggested expense, designed for long meetings and longer decisions. He placed his folder on the table, hands folded loosely atop it. They began with routine questions. Availability, experience, why he wanted the role. He answered plainly. He spoke about systems, about reliability, about wanting work where accountability mattered. He mentioned his daughter once, briefly, not for sympathy, but for truth. The men nodded without much interest. She watched him more closely, eyes narrowing just a fraction. "And before this position?" one of the men asked, scrolling. "You've been in facilities for quite some time." "Yes," he said. "Any management background?" another asked. He paused, just enough to feel the weight of the omission, then shook his head. "Not formally." Her gaze sharpened at that. "But you've led teams," she said, not a question so much as a test. He met her eyes. "In high-pressure situations, yes." Something flickered there. Confusion, maybe, or memory trying to surface. Before she could press further, a sharp beep cut through the room, then another. The lights dimmed, brightened, dimmed again. A low hum rose from the floor, wrong in pitch, wrong in rhythm. The men exchanged looks. One of them frowned at his tablet. "That's odd." Another beep, louder this time. The air vents hissed, then fell silent. The room felt suddenly sealed, the way the stairwell had felt hours ago. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then looked up, irritation flashing. "Facilities must be running tests," she said. Already annoyed, "We'll continue." He didn't sit back. He leaned forward slightly, listening. Not to the panel, but to the building. The hum underfoot wasn't random. It was a warning. The lights went out completely. In the sudden dark, someone cursed. Emergency strips flickered on, bathing the room in red. From somewhere beyond the glass, an alarm began to sound. Not the full siren yet, but the same warning tone that had tightened his gut before. He closed his eyes for half a second, then opened them. This was not over. The emergency lights steadied into a dim crimson glow, casting long shadows across the conference table. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. The alarm's low tone pulsed again, slower than the full siren but heavy with implication. He felt it in his chest the way some people felt thunder coming, an approaching inevitability. One of the men laughed nervously. "Probably a glitch. This building's systems are over-engineered to death." She didn't laugh. Her eyes were on the glass wall, then the door, calculating. "I want confirmation," she said, already tapping her phone. "Now." No signal. The screen spun uselessly. The hum beneath the floor deepened, vibrating through the chair legs and into bone. Air stopped moving. Not gradually, suddenly. The absence was loud. He drew a slow breath through his nose, tasting the change, noting how quickly it would matter if smoke followed. "Does anyone smell that?" the third man asked, voice tight. He did, faint, acrid. Not enough yet, but enough to be wrong. "Stay seated," she said, authority snapping into place. "Security will—" The lights flickered again. Somewhere outside, a door slammed, followed by raised voices. The alarm tone shifted up a register, closer now to the sound that emptied buildings and filled obituaries. He pushed his chair back a fraction, careful not to startle them. "We should stand," he said evenly. She turned on him, irritation flaring. "This is a controlled environment. We're not evacuating on a partial alarm." "With respect," he replied, already on his feet, "this isn't partial." One of the men scoffed. "And how would you know that?" He didn't answer right away. He moved to the vent along the wall and placed his hand just beneath it, feeling for airflow that wasn't there. He listened, not to the room, but to the building's silence. Systems that healthy didn't go quiet like this. "The dampers are closed in the wrong sequence," he said finally. "If they don't reopen, pressure will build where it shouldn't." She stared at him, disbelief edging into her voice. "Your facilities, you don't have access to that information." He met her gaze. "I don't need access to hear when something's failing." Another alarm sounded, this one sharper, unmistakable. The men stood now, tension snapping their professionalism apart. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a notification that made her face drain of color. "There's been a secondary incident," she said. "Mechanical level." He felt the building tip toward the same cascade he'd seen before. Once one system tripped, others followed, each assuming the last had done its job. "We need to move," he said, firmer now. "The stairwells will lock if the pressure sensors misread smoke." She hesitated, pride warring with uncertainty. This was her domain. Glass, contracts, control. He could see the calculation behind her eyes. Trust the plan or trust the man she still didn't place. The floor shuddered faintly. Somewhere far above, a muffled boom echoed, followed by shouting. That decided it. "Everyone out," she said, sharp. "Now." The door resisted when she tried it, locked. Her jaw tightened. She swiped her badge. Nothing. The men looked to her, then to him. He moved without ceremony, pulling the folded paper map from his pocket, and he spread it on the table, red emergency light washing over the creases. It was hand-marked, annotated with symbols that didn't match the sleek diagrams on their tablets. "There's a service corridor behind the panel," he said, pointing. "It bypasses the smart locks." One of the men frowned. "That's restricted." "It's also open," he replied, "right now." She watched his hands, the confidence in their movement, the way he didn't waste words. Memory stirred, gloved fingers pressing a towel, a voice counting breaths. Her irritation cracked, letting something else through. "Do it," she said. He popped the panel with a practiced twist, revealing a narrow passage the room hadn't acknowledged. Warm air breathed out. Stale, but passable. As they moved through, the alarm escalated to a full siren, the sound slicing through bone and thought. The corridor sloped downward, lights flickering. He took point without being asked, checking corners, listening to the building speak in stress and strain. Behind him, one of the men stumbled. He caught an elbow, steadying without comment. The other cursed under his breath, the veneer of superiority gone. They reached a junction where the corridor split. He paused, head tilted, counting seconds in his mind. The left path hummed louder, electrical strain singing through metal. The right carried a faint draft. "This way," he said, turning right. She followed close now, no longer questioning. "How do you know?" He didn't look back. "Because it's breathing." They emerged into a wider service stairwell, concrete walls bare and scarred with use. The door behind them slammed shut, sealing automatically. He wedged it open before the lock could engage fully. "Good thinking," one of the men muttered, shaken. He checked his watch, then the stairwell. "We have minutes before smoke reaches this level." Her eyes widened. "Smoke? They told me the fire was contained." He shook his head once. "Fire spreads through assumptions." The stairwell lights flickered, then steadied. The siren wailed on, relentless. She looked at him fully now, really seeing him for the first time since the stairwell the night before. "You were there," she said slowly. "Last night." He met her gaze, neither confirming nor denying. "We should keep moving." She nodded, swallowing whatever words she'd been about to say. "Lead." He did. As they descended, the building groaned around them, systems colliding under stress. Somewhere below, people were trapped, waiting for instructions that wouldn't help. He felt the familiar narrowing of focus, the calm that came when everything unnecessary fell away. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was another test, and the building was about to learn who it had underestimated. They reached the landing just as the air changed again, thickening with the sour bite that clawed at the back of the throat. The stairwell trembled, not violently, but enough to announce strain, metal expanding, systems fighting themselves. He slowed them with a raised hand, listening past the siren, past the pounding of his own pulse, to the language he trusted most. Failure patterns. Below them, voices echoed, too many, overlapping, sharp with fear. Someone cried out for help, the sound bouncing up the concrete like it was looking for a way out. He exhaled through his nose, steady, then started down again. At the next level, the stairwell opened into a service junction half lit by flickering fluorescents. Two security officers stood there with a cluster of employees, arguing over a tablet that kept refreshing uselessly. When they saw her, relief flashed across their faces. "Ma'am, we're waiting for instructions," one of them said quickly. "The system locked half the exits. We don't have override clearance." She opened her mouth to respond, and stopped. He stepped forward, already scanning the walls, the vents, the ceiling. A faint whistling came from above, wrong in pitch. He reached up, adjusted a vent damper manually, and the airflow shifted just enough to ease the smoke back. "Everyone against the wall," he said. "Single file, hands on the railing, we move on my count." The security officers stared, and one of them frowned. "Sir, we can't just," she cut in, voice sharp and certain. "Do what he says." The words surprised all of them, including her. As people lined up, coughing, he moved through them quickly, checking faces, noting who needed priority. A woman clutched her chest, breaths shallow and fast. Panic spiraled there, dangerous, contagious. He crouched in front of her, meeting her eyes. "Look at me," he said calmly. "We're stepping together. In through your nose, out through your mouth." She tried, failed. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the small spacer he carried for Lily, pressing it into her trembling hands along with an emergency inhaler one of the officers produced. The woman's eyes widened at the unexpected precision of it, but she followed his lead, breaths evening. From behind him, she watched the exchange, the gentle authority, the practiced care. This wasn't improvisation. This was muscle memory. The building lurched again, harder this time. Somewhere above, something crashed, followed by a rush of hot air. The smoke thickened, crawling down the stairwell faster now. "We don't have time," one of the officers said, voice tight. He nodded. "I know." He turned to the panel mounted on the wall, popped it open, and bypassed a lock with a twist that made the officer's eyebrows shoot up. The door beyond led into a mechanical access corridor, narrow, ugly, and blessedly clear of smoke for the moment. Move, he said. Now. They went, one by one, shuffling fast, guided by his voice and hands. He stayed at the back, counting, checking, wedging doors as they passed. When the last person cleared the corridor, he sealed it behind them as best he could. The corridor sloped downward toward the mechanical level. Heat radiated through the walls now, constant and heavy. Sweat stung his eyes. He wiped it away with the back of his glove, mind already mapping what they'd face ahead. She walked beside him, no longer questioning, no longer leading. "What exactly is happening?" she asked, breathless but controlled. "The pressure sensors misread smoke as containment," he said. "They sealed where they should have vented. Now heat's building in the wrong places." "And the fix?" she pressed. He glanced at her. "It's manual, and it's risky." She nodded once. "Tell me what you need." The corridor opened into the mechanical level. A cathedral of pipes, fans, and steel, alarms screaming from every direction. Smoke pooled near the ceiling, rolling like storm clouds trapped indoors. The air was barely breathable. He scanned the room, zeroing in on the main ventilation junction. The fans were stalled, dampers frozen mid-sequence. A cascade failure, just like he'd feared. "If we don't reset that junction," he said, raising his voice over the noise, "smoke will flood the stairwells in under 5 minutes. One of the officers swore softly. "Can't we shut it down?" "No," he said. "Shutting down kills airflow completely. People above won't make it." She stepped closer, face set. "Then do it." He moved fast now, climbing the steel ladder toward the junction, muscles protesting as heat pressed in from all sides. He worked with bare efficiency, checking valves, rerouting pressure, forcing systems to talk to each other again. Below, the room watched him like they were watching something rare and dangerous. The fans stuttered, the alarm spiked, then, slowly, the airflow shifted. Fresh air surged through the vents, pushing smoke back where it belonged. A cheer broke out before anyone could stop it. He slid down the ladder, chest heaving, eyes burning. The building shuddered one last time, then steadied, like a beast finally brought under control. She stared at him, something like awe breaking through her composure. "You did that," she said. He shook his head. "The building did. I just listened." Emergency lights brightened as systems rebooted. Somewhere, the siren wound down. "If you're still here, go ahead and subscribe. Because what happens after the danger passes is where the truth really hits." As responders poured in and people were ushered toward safety, she didn't look away from him. Her world had just been cracked open, and standing in the smoke and steel was the man she'd almost dismissed. The interview, she realized too late, had never really been about a job. The mechanical level filled with motion as responders took over, boots pounding metal grates, radios crackling with clipped commands. Fresh air kept flowing now, strong enough to clear the worst of the smoke, but the heat still lingered, a reminder of how close everything had come to collapse. He stepped aside instinctively, wiping sweat from his brow, already fading back into the background where he was used to standing. She didn't let that happen. "Wait," she said, voice cutting through the noise. It wasn't sharp this time, just steady. "I need a status." A fire captain turned to him first, eyes scanning the junction he'd stabilized. "You reset the dampers manually?" "Yes," he answered simply. The captain let out a low whistle. "That junction's a nightmare. Corporate systems fight it every time. It only works if you stop forcing it," he said. "The building wants to breathe." The captain nodded, respect clear. "Good work." That word, work, landed heavier than praise. It was practical, earned, and it carried weight in places like this. Around them, people who'd been evacuated hovered nearby, watching him with a mix of relief and curiosity. Whispers rippled through the group, glances flicking from his soot-smudged jacket to the complex machinery behind him. She noticed. She noticed everything now. "Can we hold the airflow?" she asked him quietly, stepping closer so only he could hear. "Long enough to clear the upper floors?" He considered, eyes narrowing as he calculated. If the pressure stays balanced, but if someone overrides remotely, "They won't," she said immediately. "I'll see to that." She pulled out her phone, signal restored now, and began issuing orders with a tone that brooked no argument. Names, departments, instructions snapped into place. Authority wielded correctly could still matter. He watched her work, recognizing the competence there, even as he recognized its limits. When she finished, she turned back to him. "You saved lives tonight." Again. He shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the spotlight. "It's not over until everyone's out." A responder shouted confirmation that the last trapped group had reached a safe stairwell. Applause broke out then, spontaneous and raw, echoing off steel and concrete. He flinched at the sound, instinctively scanning for new threats even as relief washed through him. She saw the flinch. "You don't like this," she said, gesturing to the attention. He huffed a quiet breath. "It passes." They moved together toward the exit as the mechanical level stabilized, alarms finally falling silent. The corridor back to the service stairwell felt different now, less hostile, more like a path reclaimed. People made space for him without being told, eyes following his movements with new understanding. At the reassembly point below, the building's occupants clustered under bright lights, wrapped in blankets, faces smudged with smoke and gratitude. Reporters lingered at the edges, cameras already up, hungry for a story. She spotted them and grimaced. "This is going to be public," she said. "I won't be able to keep it contained." He shrugged. "Doesn't matter." "It should," she countered softly. "You were almost invisible this morning." Almost. The word carried truth she hadn't intended to expose. A security officer approached, clearing his throat. "Ma'am, the board is asking for a briefing. They want to know who authorized the manual intervention." Her gaze didn't waver from him. "I did." The officer hesitated. "They're concerned about liability." She smiled then, thin and sharp. "Tell them the alternative was funerals." The officer nodded and retreated. He watched the exchange, a familiar tension coiling in his chest. He'd seen this moment before in other lives, where truth met bureaucracy and something had to give. Usually, it was the truth. "You don't owe me anything," he said quietly. "I did my job." She turned fully to him now, eyes searching his face like she was finally allowing herself to see all of it. "That's what you keep calling it," she said. "But this isn't just facilities work, not the way you do it." He didn't answer. The past stayed where he'd put it for a reason. An EMT passed with a stretcher, the woman from earlier breathing steadily now, color back in her cheeks. She caught his eye and lifted a hand weakly in thanks. He nodded back, small, grounding. She would have died, the EMT said to no one in particular. A few more minutes. The sentence trailed off, unfinished but complete. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them, resolve settling in. "You were here for an interview," she said. "That hasn't changed." He frowned. "The building is stable," she finished. "And what happened today belongs in that room." He looked toward the glass towers rising above them, sunlight glinting off windows that hours ago had reflected fire. The interview felt like another lifetime. "I don't want favors," he said carefully. Her reply came without hesitation. Then don't ask for one. Let the truth stand. Sirens faded into distance as the last of the responders cleared. The crowd thinned, leaving behind the quiet aftermath that always followed disaster, a space where decisions echoed louder. She gestured toward the elevators reserved for executives. "Come with me." He hesitated, then followed, boots stepping onto polished stone that felt foreign underfoot. As the doors closed, sealing them into a rising box of glass and steel, he felt the familiar tightening of anticipation, not fear, but readiness. The crisis had revealed what the building had hidden. What came next would decide whether that truth survived daylight. The elevator rose in silence, smooth and fast, the kind of ride meant to reassure people that everything was under control. He stood with his hands at his sides, shoulders relaxed but alert, listening to the faint whir of cables and the controlled hum of power restored. Across from him, she watched the numbers climb, jaw set, mind clearly moving faster than the machinery. When the doors opened, the executive floor looked almost untouched. Lights bright, glass gleaming, air cool and clean. The contrast hit him harder than the smoke had. Down below, people coughed and cried and clung to each other. Up here, everything pretended nothing had happened. She led him into the conference room again, the same table, and the same chairs. Only now, the water glasses were half full and slightly trembling from residual vibration, like the room itself hadn't fully calmed. "Sit," she said, not as an order, but an invitation. He did. The chair felt the same. He didn't. Within minutes, others filed in. Board members, senior managers, legal counsel. Their expressions ranged from irritated to shaken, eyes darting briefly to him before settling back on her. He recognized the look, assessing risk, calculating exposure. "What's the status?" one of the men demanded. "We're already getting media alerts." "The building is secure," she replied evenly. "Evacuation completed, no fatalities." A collective exhale moved around the table. "And the intervention?" another asked. "Security says it was unconventional." She didn't look away from them when she answered. "It was necessary." One of the men glanced at him again, frowning. "Who is this?" There it was. The question that always came late. She finally turned toward him. "This is the candidate you were scheduled to interview, and the reason we're not dealing with a mass casualty incident." The words landed with a dull thud, unsettling the room. Murmurs followed. Someone leaned back, arms crossing defensively. "That doesn't align with our protocols," legal counsel said carefully. "Unauthorized manual overrides saved lives," she cut in, including mine. Silence swallowed the objection whole. He shifted slightly, uncomfortable with the attention, but he didn't lower his gaze. "The system failed," he said calmly. "I followed the building, not the software." One of the board members scoffed. "And you expect us to take that on faith?" He met the man's eyes. "No, I expect you to take it on evidence." She slid her tablet across the table, stopping it in front of them. On the screen were timestamps, sensor readings, ventilation flows, data pulled directly from the system logs. His hands twitched almost imperceptibly when he saw it. She'd been thorough. "The manual reset stabilized airflow within 90 seconds, she said. "Every automated attempt failed." Another board member leaned forward, studying the data. "Who authorized him?" "I did," she said again, unwavering. "And I'll do it again." The room felt tighter now, pressure building not from smoke, but from something more dangerous: ego. He recognized this environment too, different battlefield, same stakes. "Your maintenance," one of them said bluntly, unable to mask his disbelief. "How do you even know?" how to do this. He inhaled slowly, grounding himself. This was the edge he'd avoided for years, the place where the past threatened to step into the light. I wasn't always maintenance, he said. The words hung there, incomplete, heavy. She watched him closely, giving him space he hadn't expected. Before he could continue, a knock sounded at the glass wall. A woman from HR stepped in, face pale. "There's an issue," she said. "Media's asking for a statement, and there's also a report of a child with asthma being treated downstairs. She keeps asking for her father." The room snapped to him instantly. His chest tightened, sharp and immediate. "Where?" he asked, already standing. "Paramedics," HR replied. "Just precautionary." He was halfway to the door before anyone could stop him. She followed. "Go," she said. "I'll handle this." He paused, hand on the handle, conflict flickering across his face. Work versus everything else. The answer was never really a choice. "Thank you," he said quietly, then was gone. Downstairs, the reassembly area buzzed with residual chaos. Voices overlapping, responders packing up, reporters still circling. He spotted Lily immediately, sitting on a folding chair with an oxygen mask, feet swinging anxiously. Relief hit him so hard his knees nearly buckled. "Dad," she said, pulling the mask away. "They said I was okay, but I couldn't find you." "I'm here," he said, dropping in front of her, hands warm and steady on her arms. "You did great." A paramedic smiled softly. She handled it like a champ. He nodded, brushing hair back from her forehead. "Just like we practiced." As he held her, the noise around them faded. This was the center of it all. Not the boardroom, not the building. Her. From a distance, she watched them together, the pieces finally locking into place. The calm under pressure, the precision, the refusal to seek credit. And now, the fierce, grounding tenderness of a father who measured the world in breaths. She turned back toward the elevators, decision forming with clarity that surprised even her. The building had tested him and revealed his strength. Now, the system that overlooked him would have to decide whether it was capable of change, or whether it would burn the same way again. He carried Lily away from the noise, settling her into a quieter corner where the lights weren't so harsh and the air felt cooler. Her breathing had evened out, the oxygen mask now hanging loose around her neck like a forgotten accessory. She leaned into him, fingers curled into his jacket, anchoring herself the way she always did when the world got too loud. "I'm okay," she murmured, like she needed him to believe it as much as she needed to say it. "I know," he replied softly. "I've got you." Around them, the building exhaled. People laughing shakily, phones lighting up with messages sent to loved ones, responders exchanging nods that meant another night without tragedy. It should have been over. For him, the danger usually ended here at the edge of relief, but this time it followed him. She approached slowly, not wanting to intrude. In the red-blue wash of emergency lights, she looked different. Less polished, more human. When Lily noticed her, recognition flickered across her face. "That's the lady from the fire," Lily said quietly. He stiffened just a little. "Yes," she said, crouching to Lily's level. "And I wanted to say thank you. Your dad, he helped a lot of people tonight." Lily smiled, proud and unguarded. "He always does." Something tightened in her chest at that. How simple the truth sounded when spoken by a child. "I need to borrow him for a few minutes," she said gently. "Is that okay?" Lily looked up at him, searching his face. He gave a small nod. "I'll be right back." Reluctantly, she let go. They walked a short distance away, stopping near a column where the hum of conversation dulled. She didn't waste time. "The board is divided," she said. "Legal wants distance. Operations wants answers. And the board wants to know why someone with your skill set was invisible in this building." He leaned back against the column, exhaustion finally seeping in. "That's not my problem." "It is if they bury this," she countered. "And they might try." He studied her, weighing intent. "Why do you care?" She didn't deflect. "Because I was wrong, and because I won't let the truth disappear just because it's inconvenient." He considered that, then shook his head. "I didn't do this to make a point." "I know," she said. "That's exactly why it matters." She explained quickly how the board wanted a sanitized incident report, how legal language could erase human action, how the narrative could easily shift from life-saving intervention to unauthorized risk. Each word tightened the coil in his chest. He'd seen this machine before. It always ate the same people. "They'll say I overstepped," he said quietly. "They'll try," she admitted. "Which is why we need to be precise." She pulled out her tablet again, turning the screen toward him. Schematics, timelines, sensor logs, layered evidence that told the building's real story. And then, something unexpected, footage. Grainy security video from the service corridor capturing him in motion, calm and deliberate, guiding people through smoke. "You saved this," he said, surprised. "I requested it before anyone thought to delete it," she replied. "We're presenting everything, together." He frowned. "Together?" "I'm not asking you to fight them," she said. "I'm asking you to stand there and let the facts speak." He thought of Lily sitting alone on that folding chair, of rent notices, of mornings measured in breaths. "And after?" he asked. She met his gaze. "After, whatever happens will happen in daylight." Silence stretched between them, filled with distant sirens and the murmur of survivors. Finally, he nodded once. "Okay?" She exhaled, relief flashing across her face before professionalism snapped back into place. "Good. We're heading back up. Board wants a final briefing." He glanced back at Lily. "She comes first." "Of course," she said immediately. "I'll have someone stay with her." He crouched again, meeting Lily's eyes. "I need to go talk to some people," he said gently. "You stay right here, I'll come back." She held his face in her hand, serious. "Don't let them be mean to you." A faint smile touched his lips. "I won't." As he stood, he felt the familiar steadiness return, the calm that came before decisive moments. Not adrenaline this time. Resolve. If you're following this and haven't yet, subscribe. Because what's about to happen isn't a rescue from fire, it's a rescue from erasure. The executive elevator ride felt heavier on the way up, like gravity itself was testing him. When the doors opened, the boardroom was already full. Faces turned, conversation stopped. She took her seat at the head of the table, nodding to him to stand beside her rather than across. That choice alone sent a ripple through the room. "Let's begin," she said. This time with the full picture. As screens lit up and data filled the walls, he realized something had shifted. Not just perception, but leverage. They could still choose denial, they could still protect themselves. But now, the truth was standing in the room, and it wasn't leaving quietly. The boardroom lights dimmed as the screens activated, walls filling with timelines, airflow diagrams, and sensor data that told a story no press release ever could. He stood beside her, hands loosely clasped, eyes tracking the information the way he tracked a building under stress, looking for gaps, for lies hidden in clean lines. A man, at the far end, cleared his throat. "Before we go further," he said, voice measured, "we need to establish scope. This meeting is about incident review, not personnel reevaluation." She didn't blink. "Those are the same thing today." Murmurs rippled around the table. Legal counsel leaned forward, fingers steepled. "With respect, emotions are high. We need to be careful about precedent." He felt the familiar tightening again. The moment when systems tried to protect themselves by shrinking the truth. He'd seen it in other uniforms, other rooms, other years. "Precedent already exists," she said calmly. "Ignoring reality is how we almost lost this building." She gestured to the screen. Footage rolled, him in the stairwell, sealing a door, adjusting a vent, counting breaths with a woman whose face was blurred for privacy. The room watched in silence, the authority of raw evidence pressing down harder than any argument. "That intervention wasn't authorized," one board member said stiffly. "No," she agreed. "It was necessary." Another executive shook his head. "We have protocols for a reason." He finally spoke, voice even but firm. "Protocols assume systems behave. Last night they didn't." Eyes turned to him again. Some skeptical, some curious. One openly annoyed. "And your qualification to make that call?" the skeptic pressed. He held the man's gaze. This was the edge, the line he'd avoided crossing. He could feel Lily's hands on his jacket, grounding him even now. "I've managed structural fires in confined urban spaces," he said, "with lives depending on airflow and timing. When systems fail, you either adapt or people die." Silence followed, thicker than smoke. Legal counsel broke it carefully. "That experience isn't reflected in your employment file." "No," he said simply, "it isn't." She stepped in before the implication could twist. "Because we never asked the right questions." A new slide appeared. His resume beside a second document she'd unearthed through quiet calls in old databases. Commendations, training records. A career folded neatly into the past. The room shifted. "You were military," someone said slowly. "Yes," he replied. "A long time ago." "And you chose facilities work?" another asked, disbelief edging their tone. "I chose stability," he answered, "for my daughter." That landed harder than any credential. A board member rubbed his temple. "This is highly irregular." She nodded. "So was nearly killing 200 people." The tension peaked there, a balance point between denial and accountability. He could feel it, the way you felt a structure about to give, either collapsing or redistributing its load. Finally, the chair of the board spoke, voice quiet but authoritative. "What are you proposing?" She didn't hesitate. Transparency, internally and externally, and a reevaluation of how we define expertise in this company. "And him?" the chair asked. All eyes turned again. She looked at him, not as a savior, not as a liability, but as a person. "He doesn't need a favor," she said. "He needs recognition commensurate with responsibility." He exhaled slowly. "I'm not here to be a symbol," he added. "I just don't want to be invisible." The chair nodded once, absorbing that. "Then perhaps," he said, "we've misunderstood our own foundation." The meeting stretched on, arguments rising and falling, but something fundamental had shifted. The truth had weight now. It bent the conversation instead of being bent by it. When it finally adjourned, no verdict was announced, no titles bestowed, just a directive to reconvene with full recommendations, and an unspoken agreement that nothing would be quietly erased. Outside the boardroom, the executive floor felt less imposing, the glass less cold. She walked with him toward the elevator, exhaustion finally visible. "You did well," she said. He shrugged lightly. I told the truth. She smiled faintly. That's rarer than you think. The elevator doors opened. As they descended, he felt the tension ease from his shoulders, replaced by something unfamiliar but welcome, cautious hope. When the doors opened at the lobby level, Lily was waiting, swinging her feet, eyes lighting up the moment she saw him. She ran into his arms without hesitation. Is it over? She asked. For today, he said, lifting her easily. Yeah, it is. She looked past him at the building, then back at him. Did they listen? He met her gaze, honest. They're learning how. As they stepped out into the daylight together, reporters surged forward, questions flying. He shielded Lily instinctively, turning away from the noise. She stepped in front of them then, blocking cameras with practiced ease. No statements today, she said firmly. People come first. For the first time since he'd walked into that tower, he felt something settle. Not victory, not triumph, but balance. The fire had tested the building. Now, the aftermath was testing its soul. And for once, he wasn't standing alone in the service corridor when it mattered. They moved through the lobby together, the rush of cameras and questions breaking against her like waves against stone. She guided them toward a quieter exit, one hand raised to hold back security, the other subtly angled to shield Lily's face. The glass doors slid open, letting in clean daylight that felt almost unreal after smoke and alarms. Outside, the crowd thinned. Sirens faded into background noise, and the building loomed behind them. Still standing, still impressive, but no longer untouchable. He set Lily down and knelt, adjusting her jacket, checking her breathing one last time. The rhythm was steady, normal. The knot in his chest loosened. A car pulled up to the curb, dispatched without ceremony. I'll have someone take you home, she said. You shouldn't be back here today. He hesitated. And you? She glanced up at the tower. I'll stay. There's paperwork that won't finish itself. He nodded, understanding. Thank you for not letting it disappear. Her expression softened. Thank you for not letting us pretend. Lily tugged on his sleeve. Dad, she whispered, eyes wide, you were on the screens. He smiled faintly. Just doing my job. But they listened, she insisted. Yes, he said, they did. The car door opened. As they climbed in, he felt the weight of the night finally settle into his bones, exhaustion deep and earned. As the car pulled away, he looked back once at the building, sunlight glinting off glass that hours ago had reflected fire. He didn't feel ownership, he felt closure. At home, the apartment greeted them with familiar creaks and the smell of coffee from a neighbor's pot drifting through thin walls. He helped Lily onto the couch, tucked a blanket around her shoulders, and watched her eyes flutter closed, sleep claiming her without resistance. Only then did he let himself sink into the chair opposite, head falling back, breath finally unguarded. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He stared at it for a long moment before answering. Hello? It's me, she said. Her voice sounded tired but steady. I wanted you to hear this before it leaks. He straightened slightly. Okay. The board approved a full review of safety protocols, she continued, and a restructuring of facilities oversight. Not cosmetic, real authority. He listened, heart steady, not daring to assume. They also approved an offer, she added, a role that matches what you actually do, with compensation that reflects it. Silence filled the space between them, heavy and careful. I told them, she said, that you might say no. He looked at Lily sleeping, her chest rising and falling. What did you tell them then? That it wouldn't change the truth, she replied, but that we'd be poorer for it. He exhaled slowly. Send me the details." She smiled through the phone. He could hear it. "I will." After the call ended, he sat there for a long time, not moving, letting the moment settle. It wasn't triumph that filled him, it was relief. Stability within reach, a future that didn't depend on being unseen. The next days unfolded quietly. News reports framed the incident as a near disaster averted by quick thinking and coordinated response. His name surfaced in articles, then faded as stories always did. What remained were changes that couldn't be edited out. New signage in service corridors, revised emergency drills, a different tone when people spoke to the hands that kept the building alive. When he returned to the tower a week later, it felt different. Security nodded with recognition. Staff greeted him by name. The service corridors were the same, but the silence in them had shifted, from neglect to respect. She met him in the lobby, no cameras this time, no board members hovering. Just two people standing on opposite sides of a line that had finally blurred. "Ready?" she asked. He adjusted his jacket, feeling the weight of keys in his pocket, some old, some new. "Yeah." They walked toward the elevators together, not as savior and saved, not as interviewer and applicant, but as professionals who'd met in fire and chosen not to forget what they learned. As the doors closed and the building rose around them, he felt something settle into place. Not above him, not beneath him, but beside him. The crisis had been resolved, the reversal complete. What remained was the work of living with dignity, and the quiet knowledge that sometimes the strongest structures were the ones rebuilt from the inside. The executive floor no longer felt like a place he was borrowing. When the elevator doors opened, and the air was the same temperature, the glass just as clear, but something intangible had shifted, an easing, like a system recalibrated after strain. He stepped out beside her, posture relaxed, aware of the glances that followed but no longer shaped by them. The meeting room had been rearranged. The long table remained, but the seating was looser, less hierarchical. People stood instead of sitting, papers in hand, conversations overlapping instead of waiting for permission. The building was still processing what had happened, and so were the people inside it. The chair of the board raised a hand when they entered. "Let's finish this," he said, voice calm, final. "We owe clarity to ourselves and to everyone who works here." She took her place, then looked at him. "I want him here for this," she said. Not as a subject, as a participant. No one argued. The discussion moved quickly now, stripped of pretense. Reports were summarized. Failures acknowledged without defensive language. When questions turned toward facilities operations, eyes came to him. Not with doubt, but with expectation. He answered plainly. He spoke about blind spots, about how systems were designed by people who never walked the service corridors they governed. He didn't accuse. He explained. Each sentence carried the weight of experience earned in places where mistakes cost more than money. One executive nodded slowly. "We never asked how it actually worked." "That's the problem," he said. "You asked how it looked." The room absorbed that quietly. When the conversation turned toward outcomes, the chair folded his hands. "We've approved the restructuring," he said. "Authority, budget, and accountability will sit where the risk actually lives." He glanced at her, then back to him. "And we'd like you to lead that transition." The words landed clean, without flourish. He didn't answer right away. He felt the echo of stairwells, the weight of Lily's small hands, the years spent choosing stability over recognition. He wasn't afraid of responsibility. He'd been carrying it all along. "I'll do it," he said, if the people doing the work are heard. The chair nodded. That's the point. The meeting ended without applause. No grand gestures, just signatures, timelines, and a sense that something foundational had shifted. As people filed out, several paused to thank him, not effusively, not awkwardly, just honestly. When the room finally emptied, she stayed behind, gathering her things slowly. "You okay?" she asked. He exhaled, and the tension draining at last. "Yeah, just didn't expect it to land this way." She smiled. "Neither did I." They walked together toward the windows overlooking the city. Traffic moved below, oblivious to the recalibration that had happened above it. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. He glanced at her. "For what?" "For seeing a title before a person," she replied. "For assuming the building knew more than the people who kept it standing." He considered that, then shook his head. "You changed when it mattered. That doesn't erase the first part," she said. "No," he agreed, "but it counts." She nodded, accepting that. Later, as he headed back down, the elevator ride felt almost mundane. A far cry from the night it had sealed him inside a system that didn't see him. When the doors opened at the lobby, Lily was there again, waiting patiently with a book in her lap. "Did they finish?" she asked, hopping up. "They did," he said, "and they listened." She smiled, satisfied, as if that answered everything that mattered. They walked out together into the afternoon sun. Across the plaza, a group of maintenance workers stood near a service truck, talking animatedly. One of them spotted him and raised a hand in greeting. Respect clear and unforced. He returned it. The ripple had started. Over the next days, the changes became visible in small, meaningful ways. New training sessions scheduled during paid hours. Feedback channels that actually responded. Signs posted in service corridors acknowledging emergency routes and the people responsible for them. Not performative, practical. He took on the new role without ceremony, spending most of his time where he always had. Listening, observing, adjusting. The difference was that now, when he spoke, people up top leaned in. One afternoon, as he reviewed a drill plan, Lily sat nearby, coloring. She looked up suddenly. "Dad? Yeah? You don't have to be invisible anymore, right?" He smiled, warm and certain. "No, but I still get to be quiet." She grinned. "Good, ha." As the day wound down, he stood in a service corridor and listened to the building breathe. Steady, balanced, alive. It wasn't perfect, it never would be. But it was honest now, and honesty held better than glass. The fire had forced the truth into the open. What followed wasn't applause or headlines. It was dignity, restored in daylight, and shared with everyone who'd ever kept the lights on without being seen. The building settled into a rhythm that felt almost human, like it had learned something and decided not to forget it. Morning light spilled through the lobby windows as he walked in with Lily, her backpack bouncing lightly against her shoulders. She waved to the security desk where a guard waved back. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He noticed things now that he'd always known were there, but had never been acknowledged. People greeting each other by name. Maintenance logs reviewed with questions instead of assumptions. Doors that opened when they were supposed to, vents that breathed the way they should. The tower wasn't kinder. It was smarter, and that made all the difference. He dropped Lily off at school before heading in, waiting until she disappeared through the doors before turning back to his day. The work didn't feel heavier with the new responsibility. It felt aligned. Problems surfaced, were addressed, and stayed fixed. Not because someone demanded it from above, but because the right voices were finally in the room. She stopped by his office late that afternoon. It wasn't really an office yet, more a converted planning space near the mechanical levels, but it was exactly where he wanted to be. "They're running a feature tonight," she said. "About the incident they want a quote." He looked up from the plan spread across his desk. "From me?" She nodded. "I already told them you'd pass." A faint smile crossed his face. "Good call." She leaned against the doorway, studying the schematics. "You know, people are asking questions now about how many others like you we missed." "Then they're asking the right ones," he replied. She hesitated, then said quietly, "I didn't sleep much last night." He glanced at her. "Neither did I." They shared a look that didn't need explanation. Some nights stayed with you, not as fear, but as reminders. When she left, he returned to his work, finishing notes before shutting everything down. On his way out, he passed through a service corridor and paused, hand resting briefly on the wall. Solid, steady, honest. The building answered with its quiet hum. At home, Lily sat at the kitchen table, coloring carefully between the lines. She looked up when he came in. "Guess what?" she said. "What?" he asked, setting his keys down. "My teacher asked what my dad does," she said proudly. "I told her he keeps people safe." His throat tightened. "That's a good answer." Later, after dinner and homework and the familiar rhythm of bedtime routines, he stood in her doorway and watched her drift toward sleep. Her breathing was even, calm, safe. That was the win that mattered. He stepped into the living room and sat for a long moment, letting the quiet wrap around him. His phone buzzed with messages, co-workers sharing updates, a neighbor thanking him for checking the alarms, a stranger who'd recognized him at the store and simply said, "Thanks." He didn't reply to all of them. He didn't need to. Being seen wasn't the same as being loud. The next morning, the headline came and went. Comments flared and faded. The world did what it always did, moved on. But inside the tower, inside the lives it held, something had shifted and stayed. Weeks later, during a routine drill, he watched teams move with confidence instead of confusion. He saw leaders listening instead of directing blindly. He saw people trust the systems because the systems finally trusted them back. She caught his eye across the room and nodded once. No words. None were needed. On his lunch break, he sat outside on the steps, sunlight warming his face. He thought about the night of smoke and alarms, about the interview table, about the moment when everything could have been erased and wasn't. The dignity that followed hadn't been handed to him. It had been earned, witnessed, and shared. If you've stayed with this story, now I want to hear from you. What should the next story be about? Subscribe, and don't miss our next story. He was just the night guard, until the CEO realized the building was his. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?